Alright, so today I want to show you 8 of the most expensive recessive jeans in ball pythons. And if you're actually looking for more of a long-term project to invest in, recessive is definitely the way to go. And the difference between recessive and dominant or co-dominant is that for the recessive you actually need 2 copies of the gene for a visual. So if you took a recessive, you bred it to something else, essentially what you get is you get all normal looking snakes. You can't see 1 copy of the gene. And it's actually more of a long-term project because essentially what you're doing is you're breeding that snake through your collection, and then you get hets with 1 copy of the gene. And then what you're actually doing is waiting for your females to mature, and usually it takes 2 or 3 years for those females to mature, and that is really the lag time in the recessive project. Versus if you actually had something like Bobby here around my neck, he is a bamboo ball python. This is a co-dominant gene, so I can actually breed through my entire collection and produce a whole bunch of male and female bamboos that are visual right off the bat. And kind of the downside of doing that is if a lot of people actually invest in a dominant or co-dominant gene that's really expensive and breed it really heavily and produce a lot of offspring, a lot of times that'll actually drive the price down because it increases the supply. So let me tell you, recessive is definitely more of a long-term project. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you 8 of the most expensive recessive genes in ball pythons. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with this snake right here. This is the monsoon gene, which is a pretty interesting gene. This is the #1 most expensive gene as far as recessive genes in ball pythons here in 2020. And let me tell you, the prices can really change from year to year. So in 5 years or 10 years from now, let me tell you, these will be all switched up and there'll be different genes as far as the most expensive recessive gene. And this one's kind of interesting. It's actually a really interesting visual appearance as far as comparing it to all the other genes in ball pythons. It looks completely different. I'd say the only thing that really looks similar to this is probably like a granite Burmese python, completely different than all the other genes in ball pythons. And if you actually look at the price over here, this is kind of crazy. As a matter of fact, this one actually sold for $10,000 last year. Just last year I saw some of these that were selling for $15,000, which is kind of crazy. And if you actually are looking for a monsoon, you may be out of luck because there's not a whole lot of them that are even in existence yet. It's a relatively new gene. As a matter of fact, I actually came over here on Morphmarket and I kind of wanted to show you how many snakes are over here on Morphmarket. It's pretty amazing. I actually sorted just by ball pythons and I listed all the ones that are for sale and that have sold over here on the history of Morphmarket. There's actually been 185,000 ball pythons over here on Morphmarket. That's almost unbelievable. I can't believe it. As a matter of fact, when I started about 5 years ago in ball pythons, I think there was only about 40,000 over here at Morphmarket, and I thought that was a lot. It's pretty amazing. Just in 5 years, it's come up to 185,000. And if you actually compare that to how many monsoons that have ever been posted over here on Morphmarket, take a look at this. There's only ever been 8 monsoons over here, and that is one of the reasons that the price is really high, because a lot of times it's pretty much like a supply and a demand that sets the price on some of these genes. And this one, you can definitely tell from some of these pictures, it's a really visually stunning gene. It's really obvious that you have a monsoon, and it's one of the new ones on the market. There's a lot of people actually looking for monsoons, and even if you wanted a monsoon, you might not be able to actually get one because they're all completely sold here. As a matter of fact, if you're actually looking for one, what I do is I go back to the breeder and maybe ask, or maybe contact some of the people that have bought some monsoons from the breeder. Maybe they have produced some privately in their collection as holdbacks or something like that. You may be able to actually pick some up, but it's pretty much all the monsoons over here on Morphmarket have been posted by Dave Green. He actually originated the monsoon in his collection. As a matter of fact, I actually just noticed one was from Justin Kobelka, which is kind of interesting. One that just kind of popped up recently on monsoon, but some of these you can see, like back in 2018, they were like $15,000, $16,000, and sometimes they'll just put inquire because the prices can vary quite a bit, especially at the top end when there's a limited supply of some of these genes. All right, so here is the second most expensive recessive gene over here on Morphmarket, and that is the rainbow. It's pretty interesting. I thought some other genes would kind of trump the rainbow, and you may not have heard of the rainbow. Essentially what it is, it's kind of a cross between, it almost looks like a cross between like an albino and a coral glow. Kind of an interesting combination, I'd say. It kind of looks like a coral glow, but it has a lot more definition, and I think it has better colors than the coral glow, especially as it ages and matures. It's a relatively new gene on the market. If you actually take a look at the price on this one's actually still for sale for $5,000. Pretty crazy for rainbows. And there's actually, on a lot of these, there's a price range on some of them where there's kind of like a high price and a low price, and I kind of looked for the mid-range price as far as the average price on these. There's a lot of these that didn't have many examples over here on Morphmarket. As a matter of fact, I pulled up all the rainbows that have ever been posted over here. There's only been 19, which is kind of crazy, and there's actually quite a few for sale, some rainbows over here. So they go all the way up to, if you actually look at a lot of the combinations, they can go way up from there. So here's one for $8,000, which is a rainbow combination, still for sale. Pretty crazy. If you actually look through these, the rainbow is really visually dominant, kind of what you'd expect from the albinos and some of the coral glows and bananas and stuff like that. That is kind of similar to that as far as the visual appearance. So here is number 3, that is the sunset. It's kind of interesting. I've heard a lot of people investing in the sunset because it's recessive and it's a really good investment. Although pretty much all the genes that I'm listing today are pretty much equivalent to the sunset. If you're looking for a gene to invest in other than the sunset, it seems like there's a lot of people that are crazy over this gene. And the sunset's also really visually dominant. If you work other genes into it, you can definitely tell the sunset has a really strong visual effect as far as the visual appearance of the snake. And it's kind of interesting, when I started 5 years ago, I only saw het sunsets over here on Morphmarket, and it was like 2 years before I finally saw a visual sunset. And I was like, what is this gene, the sunset? That nobody's actually listed one over here. I didn't know what they looked like for a couple of years, and finally I saw them. They're really beautiful, almost like a metallic coppery colored snake. And if you actually look at the price on this one sold for $3,500 here in 2020, and sometimes the females can be a little bit more expensive. The sunsets can kind of vary as far as the prices. So I actually pulled up a whole list of sunsets, and to my surprise, there's actually 77 sunsets and sunset combinations over here in Morphmarket, which is pretty amazing, since when I started there wasn't a single one over here. Now you can actually see some of the potential of the sunset, working it into other combinations. So here is the monarch. The monarch's kind of interesting too. The monarch, I'd say, as far as being close to something else, it's really close to the ultramel, although it seems to be a lot brighter and a lot more defined than the ultramel. And the monarch has been around for quite a while. From the beginning, I saw quite a few monarchs over here, and they're really holding their price really well. This one's actually for sale for $3,500. It's a pastel monarch. And I pulled up monarchs over here on Morphmarket. There's only 40 that have ever been posted over here on Morphmarket. It's kind of interesting. Out of 185,000 snakes over here, there's only been 40 monarch and monarch combinations. So you can definitely see on some of these how beautiful they are when you mix them into combinations. It definitely is a lot more brighter and has a lot more contrast than you'd see in some of your ultramels. At first I thought it was really close to the ultramel, and I was wondering if it was actually allelic with ultramel, and come to find out, I actually found someone who bred a monarch to an ultramel and got normal looking snakes that are double hets. So it's definitely not another line of ultramel, although sometimes you can actually be kind of tricked into thinking it might be really similar to ultramel. But if you actually look at some of these on the bottom, those are really crazy looking snakes. I absolutely love the monarchs. So here's another one. This is actually the Krypton or the Cryptic. Gets a little bit confusing. I actually just recently discovered this, and there's actually quite a few over here. And the Krypton is it's a little bit confusing. So the Cryptic is the gene with 2 copies of the cryptic gene, and then the krypton is actually het for cryptic and het for clown. It has 1 copy of the cryptic, 1 copy of the clown, and it has the visual appearance of the cryptic, which gets a little bit confusing. And if you actually look at it just as a normal looking, just as a standalone gene, it looks pretty close to the normal ball python, except you can see some highlighting coming up. You can really see a jumbled up pattern in these, and then a lot of times you can actually see striping along the neck. Sometimes on the top of the neck or the side, it'll have really strong striping, and a lot of times it'll actually have kind of this bald spot coming up right along the head. And let me tell you, if you actually work the krypton or the cryptic into other combinations, it has some incredible potential. Actually, I was pretty floored as far as looking over here and looking at all the different combinations as far as what you can do with this gene. It's pretty amazing. And this one's actually still for sale for $2,000, so it's not too bad compared to some of the other recessive genes. I actually pulled it up over here on Morphmarket and looked at the number of cryptics over here, and this is actually 71, which was pretty surprising that there's so many over here. It's kind of crazy. And I found a lot of these, especially on this one, sometimes the prices can really vary. They can really jump around. Sometimes you can see them for relatively inexpensive, and sometimes they are super expensive, going up into thousands and thousands of dollars. So here's another gene that's still in the top 8, which is pretty surprising, and that is the tri-stripe. When I first started in ball pythons, I was thinking, you know what I really need to do? I need to buy a tri-stripe, and I never did, and let me tell you, I probably should have bought a tri-stripe. If you actually look at the prices on these, this one's actually sold in 2020 for just a little over $2,000, which is pretty crazy. I can't believe the prices on the tri-stripe. And let me tell you, when it comes to the tri-stripe, I think my favorite is probably the albino tri-stripe. It looks just like this, except it's the white and yellow color with the red eyes. Pretty amazing combination. If you actually look over here on Morphmarket, there's actually been 144 visual tri-stripes over here on Morphmarket. So it's been around a long time, and the prices, it's pretty interesting that the prices have really remained really high, and I think it really comes down to a supply and demand as far as this. So there's not really that much demand, but I don't think the supply is there. I don't think a lot of people are really breeding a lot of tri-stripes, which I think that really keeps the prices pretty high for this gene. Here's another one in the top 8, and that is the puzzle. And let me tell you, the puzzle is probably one of the ones I'll invest in next. The puzzle is pretty amazing, especially in combinations. If you look at it just as a standalone gene, a lot of times it'll actually have some streaking on the side and really kind of give you like a wiped out pattern on the side, and a lot of times it'll reduce the pattern. But let me tell you, when you work the puzzle into a lot of your combinations, you can get some really amazing combos, especially if you work it in with pastel or super pastel. And this one actually sold for $2,000, a male puzzle in 2020. It's a pretty amazing project. So I actually came over here and looked at the number of puzzles over here in Morphmarket, and I was actually kind of surprised that there was so many puzzles. There's actually been 239 visual puzzles over here, and I'm actually quite surprised that the prices stayed so high for the puzzle, and I think it's because it makes some of the most amazing combinations. When you work it into other genes, you get some really amazing combos working puzzle into some of these other genes. It's a pretty amazing gene. So here's the last one I wanted to show you. This is another one, the last one in the top 8 most expensive recessive genes in ball pythons, and that is the black axanthic. It's kind of an interesting gene, and essentially what this is, it is an axanthic. So essentially it strips all the color from the snake, and you're left with more blacks in the black axanthic versus some of your other axanthics. It's kind of like one of the niche axanthic lines out there, which is kind of interesting. I actually looked up the number of axanthic, the black axanthics, and there's only been 48 over here on Morphmarket. Not really that popular. Not a whole lot has actually been done with the black axanthic. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Randy H asks, what price would you put on a Silver Streak Lesser ball python? And that is a very good question. When it comes to pricing ball pythons, let me tell you, it can be a little bit overwhelming because sometimes prices can be all over the place. And probably where I'd actually start, I'd go over to morphmarket.com and do a search for the Silver Streak Lesser. So the Silver Streak is actually the combination of the black pastel and the super pastel with the addition of the Lesser. And if you actually can't find a Silver Streak Lesser over on Morphmarket, you can actually look at the sold snakes over there. And I'm pretty sure in order to look at the sold snakes on Morphmarket, you actually have to set up an account, which is completely free. You just log in, set up an account, and then you can actually look at the sold snakes over there. A lot of times looking at the sold and the for sale, you can get a kind of an idea as far as how much that would actually be. And what I'd actually do is if you're looking for like a specific combination that doesn't exist over on Morphmarket, sometimes you can kind of guess based on the price of some of the genes. So for example, I would actually go over and look at a Silver Streak, and a lot of times you can actually, when you're looking at basic genes like pastel or lesser or Mojave or something like that, you could probably add about $80 per gene to the combination as far as adding it in. Although if you added it into really high-end combinations, so for example, if you added lesser into the monsoon, you may be able to bump up the price a lot more than $80 because it's a really rare combination in the first place, which with a really rare recessive gene. So that really depends on a lot of factors. The other thing is if it's a male or a female, some people price the females a little more expensive, and especially if you have an older female. A lot of times older females can sell for 2 or 3 times the money based on, you know, comparing it to a hatchling, because you're closer to that breeding age where someone could potentially get a bigger return on investment. But let me tell you, when they're pricing ball pythons, it can be pretty complicated. And usually a lot of times if you actually, even on Morphmarket, there's actually a range. So sometimes there'll be a really big range from the low end all the way to the high end for the same exact combination. And a lot of times you can actually look at the quality of your combination. So if it looks kind of brown and muddied out, maybe it's a little less expensive, but it's really bright and intense or really unusual compared to all the other ball pythons over there, sometimes you can really bump up the price. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.